Hey, this is Chris. We're here today to talk about being a pilot, and we're here with Brian and James. Brian's the pilot. He is a training captain, and he pilots a Citation Latitude. And from what I understand, he flies owners around the world. And James is a young person who's looking to be a pilot, and he's joining the interview to chat with Brian and see what information he can pick up that might help him in his future career. And I'll hand it over to you, Brian, if you want to give yourself another little more elaborate introduction.
Yeah, Brian, and I've been flying commercially, I guess, it's coming up on 27 years now. I have flown in the airlines for quite a while. I flew at a couple of different airlines, and I have found myself for the last 17 years flying at a fractional airline, if you will. And basically, what that is the best way to explain it is it's a timeshare for wealthy individuals and companies to buy into the airplane or aircraft and be able to have that aircraft at their disposal to fly just about anywhere they want to in the world. So I was a first officer for quite a while, and I'm a captain now, and also a training captain. So basically, what that is that when new captains and new first officers come into our fleet, I train them and kind of get them on their way and get them flying out on what we call the line um, for the fractional airline that I work with.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And of course, we'll circle back into that and kind of dig into those details and what all those mean. But James, you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm James, as he mentioned. I am 16 years old, about to be 17 in about 2 weeks. I've been interested in aviation my entire life. Originally wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, decided, not for me, and so now I'm interested in commercial aviation.
All right. Great. I appreciate that. Sounds like everybody's kind of on the same brain wavelength here. So, so okay, Brian, jumping into it then, let's just talk a little bit about, break this down. And I mentioned before we started recording, some of the things I look for on these interviews is, there's a stereotypical what you get when you Google, I want to be a pilot. The FAA has a blurb about it. Uh, couldn't find a lot. There's a few, I think the best one I found was the Piper. Um, let's see, it was Piper.com had how to become a pilot, learn if aviation is the right career for you. I'll come back and put some show notes, in the video. But if you could maybe just talk about being a pilot, if you could break that down, it could be what you do right now and maybe a little bit about what it was as a commercial. And then, sorry, lost my screen there. But if you could break that down and yeah, I guess what's the things that people don't see? Because when I go to the airport, the pilot comes in with his suitcase, walking behind him and the flight crew, and you walk on the plane and you go sit in the captain's seat and you smile and wave and make some announcements, welcome everybody aboard. Um, but is there more to that than being a pilot? You know, let you take it from here and kind of break it down and share with people what it's like on a really a daily basis. Like where does all that time
Okay,
go?
so so for being in the fractional world now, it is pretty different from being at the airlines. I like to say that for every hour that you're actually flying, it's about 2 hours on the ground preparing and finishing up the flight. Um, a typical day usually starts. We have iPhones, and all the communications between myself and the company is through the iPhone through an app, and they usually give me what's called a briefing the night prior, and it has my schedule for the next day. Um, Typically, it's about yeah, 3 or 4 flights a day, and they can range anywhere from 30 minutes all the way up to I've had 6.5 hour flights. Um, so, an average day, I usually wake up about 6 o'clock in the morning. um, get down to the van that takes me over to the airport. And because we are a fractional, we are usually on what I like to call the opposite side of the airport, the private side. So we're at the FBOs where you would do flight training and where all the private airplanes come in. Um, at that point, we usually check in for our flight via the iPhone and gather up all of our weather reports, all of our schedules, and then who we're flying for that day. Um, and once we get all the paperwork kind of in our hands, we make our way out to the airplane and do a pre-flight. And usually, since it's both myself and my first officer, you know, we each have uh, separate jobs. So the captain, he usually walks around the airplane, does the pre-flight, make sure that we have fuel on board, make sure that there's oils in the engines, um, make sure that
And you
all the wheels.
you're
Yeah.
you're doing this. I mean, this is you and your officer with you. This is not a
Yes.
mechanic that's doing this for you.
Oh no. Yeah. This is
Okay.
myself and my first officer. Yeah. So typically we'll walk around the airplane, make sure that nothing's leaking from it, and everything looks like it's in good shape that it can in fact go fly. Um, so once we do the walk around, once we get in, typically while I'm on the outside of the airplane, the first officer is on the inside of the airplane, making sure that it's clean, that we have the proper catering on board, um, and making sure that everything just looks appropriate inside the cabin. Once we do that, we start up the airplane with the uh, the APU, which is the auxiliary power unit, and start working through all the systems of the airplane, making sure that all the systems, all the computers are correct and reacting correctly. And from that point, we start programming the flight, which basically puts in our route from, say, point A to point B. And we verify that with each other, and everything within the airline business, if you will, is always at least cross-checked with someone else. So if I'm looking at the weather, for instance, I have people back in the headquarters that are meteorologists and dispatchers, and they've looked at the weather as well. Um, when I put in a flight plan, my first officer looks at the flight plan. We verify that against what air traffic control has given us. So it's a lot of double checking, even triple checking in certain stance. Um, so once all of the programming is taken care of, once all of the all the checks of the aircraft are done, we kind of sit there, wait, and wait for our owners to show up, which is a little bit different than the airlines. Um, since they own the aircraft, they pretty much show up, typically on time. Sometimes they're late, sometimes they're early, but it's their airplane and they get to do pretty much what they want to do. Um, so once they're on, or show up, we make sure that they are in fact who they are, usually checking some type of license, some type of passport, and then loading the luggage. And once we get them on inside the aircraft, it's up to either myself or my first officer to give them a brief, which is basically the flight attendant brief that you hear on the commercial airlines. And once that's all done, we get up front, give ourselves one more briefing, and then start the flight. Um, and then,
And
yeah,
is all that work regardless of whether you have a 30-minute flight or a 6-hour flight?
exactly. Yeah. And it
Okay.
can be as much as a 5-minute flight on some flights that we may have with empty legs with no passengers. So
But
yes,
you can die and crash just as easily in 5 minutes as you can in an hour, right?
that's exactly it. Absolutely. So, but yeah, yeah, you do the flight, and if it's a smooth flight where there's no weather or nor no traffic, as far as air traffic that's delaying you. It should be a normal flight. At the end of it, we offload the passengers, offload their luggage, clean the airplane, um, and do it all over again. So that's pretty much a normal flight, with
Okay.
beginning to end.
I was surprised to hear you say you do that sometimes. I think you said like 3 or 4 times a day
Oh,
has
oh
happened
yeah.
before.
So
Wow.
a typical day is you'll usually start out with what we like to call an empty leg with no passengers, and we fly to the destination where the passengers actually are, pick up passengers, take them to a destination, and then we'll fly to another location to find other passengers to fly them to where they need to go. And and
I see.
typically it's about a four leg day. And like I said, some of the empty legs where there's no passengers, it could be I've had as short of legs as 6 minutes. Um,
Yeah.
and like I said, my longest flight has been, yeah, about 6.5, 6 hours and 45 minutes or so. Yeah.
Okay, I understand better now. You're not doing the whole pre-check 3 or 4 times a day and like leaving from the same spot. You've done a pre-check, you get going, and then you're kind of going leg to leg at that point.
Yes. Yeah. And,
Okay.
and once you do a lot of the pre-flight, if you will, that we're allowed to omit certain things in subsequent legs. So
Yeah.
it does shorten it up, but still, like I said, it's for about every hour that you're flying. For at least 1 hour on the in the air, it's about 2 hours on the ground, give or take. So
Yeah.
it's quite the process, really, on the ground. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm surprised to hear it's that flip-sided. I would have kind of thought the opposite maybe, but um, James, you've probably had some insight into this already and some of the things you've been involved in. Has that been your experience so far?
Yeah, I would say doing the orientation flights with Civil Air Patrol, you go through all the pre-checks and stuff, and there are certain things that have omitted because they did that before you get to the plane in general. Uh, but yeah, I'd say I think on an hour-long O flight, there's probably about an hour and a half of just pre-checking, and that's just for a Cessna 152. So, you know,
Yeah. Okay. All right. There's the little things I pick up myself on each of these interviews. Uh, so it's a very good breakdown. A lot of the things that I try to cover is like in the office, out of the office, travel, meetings, stuff like that. It doesn't sound like you go into an office hardly at all. It's a lot of communication, just remotely, so to speak, where you're getting things over the phone, iPhone or something, and then you're basically going on into the airport. You're not having to go into some debriefing room for 2 hours before you get to walk out to the
Right.
plane. So, um,
Exactly.
and would that be so? In your case, you call this a fractional airline? Is that what you called it?
Yeah. Yeah. A
That's a
fractional
term
airline.
that's recognized in the industry, fractional airline.
Yes, yeah. So
Okay.
typically there's you have the airlines that everybody is familiar with: American, Delta, United, and all that. And then you have the charter business, which is basically individuals and individual companies that rent out their airplanes on a single use, if you will. And then the company I work for is the fractional, and there's a handful of them, but primarily there's three well-known fractional outfits out there, and the
Okay.
the yeah the individuals
I'm
actually own part of that aircraft.
okay. I'm going to circle back to that. The Just get you to the little contrast later when we get to that about between the fractional, the commercial, and the charter. Because I guess in my mind I was thinking it's commercial charter, kind of like a private. So it's interesting to hear. Like I'd like to hear what the industry known terms are for that for viewers watching. So if they're googling something, they know the right terms to look for. If
Sure.
they're wondering what their options are. So getting back to your job, what you do right now, and things like that. If you could maybe touch a little bit on your career path, what you you know, how you got there, what were the different levels and titles you went through, and um, that's, I guess, the unique part too. Is there anything unique about your role other than maybe other fractional airline pilots? Anything that sets you apart from them that you think would be neat to talk about?
Um, okay,
But
yeah.
I'll let you kind of.
So yeah, I'm kind of like James. I Since I was little, I knew I wanted to fly airplanes. My father was a commercial pilot, so I remember going on trips with him as a
Wow.
middle schooler. And I thought, I think I could do this. This looks pretty cool. Um, so as I graduated high school, I started getting into the training aspect of it. And one for me personally, um, I had thought about the military just for a short while, decided that wasn't really for me. Um, and I decided that if anything ever happened to me physically or I couldn't fly an airplane, I wanted something to fall back on. So I went into college for a communications degree. So my background in college is communications. And as I was getting that degree, I flew on the side. So I went to just a private um, airport in Cincinnati and flew on the side, found a flight instructor, and Um, started flying privately. I and the normal sequence is you go and get your private license, which usually takes about 35 to 40 hours of flight time. From there, typically, and I say this typically, there are many different paths, but this is, if you take this path, this is kind of the typical path. Um, I went and got my instrument license, which basically, when you get your private, you're flying line of sight. So whatever you see out the window, that's where you're flying to. When you get into your instrument rating, you go into the instrument panel right in front of you. So you can fly strictly off of the panel and not look outside and get from point A to point B. Um, Once you get that license, you typically go on to get your commercial license, which I believe is James probably knows better than me at this point, but usually it's about 250 hours. I believe it's still at where you get your commercial license. And during each one of these sequences through private, instrument, and commercial, you have to take a written test. You have to have a oral test in front of a flight examiner, and then a practical test. You have to go up in an airplane and actually show them that you know how to fly and do the certain sequences that they want you to fly. Um, so I got my commercial license, and from there, you're basically just building time. That's what I did, along with getting my CFI, which is a certified flight instructor. So I was a certified flight instructor, a certified flight instructor instrument rated, and I at one time I was able to teach any new student um, their private license, their commercial, and eventually, instrument, commercial, and multi-engine. So, um, so that was kind of my path to get the hours that I needed to eventually get paid to fly an airplane. Um,
Hmm.
After I flight instructed for about a year, somewhere in that neighborhood, I went and got um, uh, a freight job, which I was basically flying packages for UPS, FedEx, and just the United States Postal Service, just all their postal service, and a small twin engine prop airplane. I did that until I got about 1,200 to 1,500 hours, and I ended up getting hired to American Eagle, which was a regional airline at the time. Um, I flew there for a while as a first officer. I upgraded to captain, and that was during. I'm showing my age now. 9/11, and 9/11 happened, and that kind of had a paradigm shift with how I thought about progressing through my career and how the industry was all shaped. Um, and I kind of took a step back and kind of focused more on family at that point than my career. And I ended up thinking that if I changed to another airline, that would be better off for my family and personal life. So we ended up changing to a another regional airline, and um, flew there for about 4 years. And it wasn't looking like it was a very good move. The airline was kind of in its decline and wasn't doing so well. And that's when I ended up getting the job that I have now. I really didn't want to do it. Um, I my personal thoughts were I was going to be flying rich people around um, that were very picky on what they wanted and how things were supposed to be done, and it was going to be gone for a long period of time. And I thought, nope, I don't want to do that. I had a lot of friends talk me into it, and my wife talked me into it, at least interviewing. And I got hired pretty much on the spot. The next day they called me, and I took the job, and I haven't looked back. It's probably been one of the yeah. Well, I've been there for 17 years, so it's been a pretty good job.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's. Would you say? And I don't know if this is typical of the field, but being a pilot, you moved between these different roles, in the private, the commercial, the freight, the fractional. Um, would you say it was? I don't want to make it sound too easy or just take it for granted. You probably have to be good at what you do and get interviewed and know what you're doing. But would you say that if you were pretty adept at what you do, like being able to move between, if you were unhappy in the freight, moving over to commercial, if you're unhappy in commercial, moving over to, the charter or more of the private business, would you say that that's fairly easy?
So the all everything that you do as a pilot, you're doing to get that commercial job, that airline job. Um,
I
so
see.
being a flight instructor, that was building time to get to that next level, so that I could fly freight. Um, and the industry is a little bit different now. So I don't know if there's a whole lot of guys still flying freight and smaller aircraft. But that was the next progression for me. Um,
But it was
so
all about getting your commercial. It wasn't because you didn't want to do private, so you went to freight. You didn't want to do freight, so you went to commercial.
right.
You
So
really
yeah,
everything was building up to commercial until the 9/11 changed your
that
mindset
that
of
that's
your.
exactly it. Yeah. So
Okay.
everything I my goal was to go work for one of the big three. Um, and that was my goal straight out from the very beginning. So that's why I didn't want to go to the fractionals even. I thought,
Yeah.
oh, I'm going to go to American, I'm going to go to Delta or United. Um, so everything that I did along that path was to build more hours, build more experience, and get to that interview for Delta or United or American.
Yeah.
um, 9/11 kind of shifted all of that, and the we in the industry, the airlines are continually cyclical. There's
Yeah.
periods of high employment and periods of low employment, and they're furloughing and laying off. And
Yeah.
I've been kind of riding on the backside of that wave all through my career.
Hmm.
Um, but it's been a pretty good career so far.
Is it pretty typical? Would you say most people, most pilots like have that goal in mind of working for the big three, or is that like only half the people? It's not that common, or it's the majority? And
You
James, I
know
want to ask
what?
you that same question. What you have in
It,
mind there, if you have that thought process?
it's funny because I always thought that's where everybody wanted to go, to the airlines. That's where the big airplanes are. That's where the most money is, and it's the prestige of flying for a international company. So that's what I wanted. When I got into the fractional business, I have met a lot of guys that are like, "Oh yeah, I don't want anything to do with the airlines. This is what I want to do." So I I'd say a majority of guys still want to fly the big airplanes and fly for the international companies, but there are quite a few that say, "Hey, you know what? I'm good with small corporate aircraft,
Mhm.
and that's where I want to be."
Yeah. So James, was is that where you're at? You know, do you have thoughts like that of going to the big three, or you kind of already know where you want to go with it?
Yeah, for me, I think a lot of what he said about the process of getting there, which is getting the CFI certifications, and then going up and getting those hours, and then eventually getting to the point where I do get the ATP and I can go to the airlines and work for one of the big three, or really any big airline that flies basically everywhere.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
did you know about the fractional airline industry?
I've actually
Like,
never heard of that until today. I've heard of charter, heard of a lot of different types of flying, and know quite a bit of people that do different types of flying. Never heard of fractional till today. So, very
yeah,
interesting.
no, that's great. I mean, that's I like to try to pull things out that it's like somebody's hasn't heard about, or you know some new ideas or new way of looking at new perspectives. So that is pretty neat, Brian, that we ended up talking to you. It's going to be neat no matter who we talk to. Even if it was commercial, I'm sure they would have great things to say too. Not discounting any of them, but finding those more obscure ones that people don't know about. I don't think I saw kind of like that kind of industry show up. When I was just researching the job. It's kind of so that is neat. Moving on from that, would I guess you're do you have any likes or dislikes about your job? Sounds like you're pretty happy with it. I'd like
Um,
to hear if there are any dislikes that you would
yeah.
make sure people knew about before they just thought it was all roses. And then like your work
So
life balance.
yeah, the work life balance is pretty good. I typically, but for my schedule, I work 7 days and then I'm off 7 days. So I I always have liked to say, by about day 5 on the road, I'm like, oh, when do I get to go home? And by about day 5 at home, the family's like, when are you going back to work? but but it works. It works very nicely. Um, the things that I don't like, um, we work long hours. A typical day for us, and this isn't flight time, it's just hours working, is anywhere from average of about 12 hours, to be honest. Which, starts getting kind of long when you've got people's lives in your hands and, you're flying from, say coast to coast or something. So it does start getting kind of long. Um, our minimum time off is 10 hours. So, that's from the moment that you basically put the airplane to bed, so to speak, and shut it down, and you're off to the hotel. So you have 10 hours to get your sleep, get something to eat, get showered in the morning, get something to eat in the morning, and off again. So
Yeah.
it does get pretty compressed. Um, so that's probably my biggest, dislike is just the long hours and the short overnights.
Okay. Do
Um,
you work overnight sometimes? Would you call it like shift
Sometimes.
work? Or are you on call, so to speak, during those
So
seven
yeah.
days?
So again, going back to the iPhone, um, typically it's for the airplane that I'm on. It's typically about a 6 o'clock show in the morning, and typically till about 6 o'clock in the evening time, somewhere in there. There are occasions though, and that time does change depending on what the company wants us to do, and depending on what owners they want us flying for. I've done red eyes that start at 8 p.m. in the evening time and fly till 6 o'clock in the morning. Um,
But
I
that's
don't
not the
care for those.
norm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but for me on my aircraft, that is not the norm. Um,
Okay.
we have approximately, oh gosh, probably about 8 to 10, I want to say, different types of airplanes within our company. And the bigger ones that do a lot of the international flying, you'll see them do a lot more of the red eyes going over to Europe and so forth.
I see. Okay. So it's
Yeah,
not like the whole industry just kind of works with that schedule. You have a range of positions or
typically, yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. Okay. All right. Is there any ongoing certifications? Is this like a never-ending learning thing that you have to keep up, or once you get there, you're kind of good, and you can coast for the next few years?
Oh gosh.
How does that
So,
work?
um, so once you get hired to an airline or the fractional like I'm with, um, it's usually about every year you have to go back to school, um, and that entails about a 4 day, going back to school, flying the simulator for typically for us it's 3 sessions that we fly, um, ranging everything from emergency procedures to just regular line flying from point A to point B, and then um, on the final day we usually do a what's called a check ride, and that's when the examiner is in the back and he makes sure that you're indeed doing exactly what you need to be doing correctly,
Okay. And
and that
James, were
and that
you?
happens. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just I was gonna ask James if he was aware that that's kind of a common. Is that a commonly known thing?
Yeah,
Like,
I don't know if it's commonly known, but I know about it. So yeah.
okay, yeah.
Um, and the other part of that is that every 6 months, as a commercial pilot, you have to keep up your medical, and that just entails going and getting what's called a first class medical. Um, and the doctor basically checks your hearing, your eyesight, um, blood pressure, just a basic, simple
Yeah,
medical,
I'm fine with
and
that.
and that's every 6 months.
Yeah.
And once you're over the age of 45, you have to start getting EKGs at least once a year. I think it's over the age of 45. You have to get your first one, and then I believe every year after that you have to get at least one EKG a year.
Okay.
So those are
But
pretty much the requirements to maintain your commercial pilot, if you will, your ATP.
okay, and it's required. That's the key point. It's not an optional thing, But
Right.
it doesn't sound too onerous to keep up
No.
with,
Nope.
especially if you're constantly moving and performing on the job. On the income side, this we talked about this a little bit earlier too. And is there any feedback you have, or like how would you tie an income with whether it's personal or in tiers of the different charter, commercial, freight? I'm sure it's like anything, the more experience you get, one would assume the better off you are. That may not be the case if you stay in certain industries, or certain industries known as being better than others, you know, levels.
So when I started, um, the income was very low. I remember my first real airline job. I was making somewhere in the mid 20s to start out with the first year. Um, Once you start progressing, and things have changed drastically since then. Um, I believe I just saw the other day for a regional airline that is, the subsidiaries of the big three, if you will. I want to say that they were offering about 100 grand as a bonus for the first year. Um, that was unheard of. I saw his eyes pop up there.
Yeah.
That was unheard of when I
James is
first
going to ask for
started.
the link to that when we're done.
um, but nowadays, things are much different. Um, the the airlines themselves, the big three, um, if you've put in, a number of years and you're a captain, you're making well into the six-figure digits, and it's a comfortable living. for the company I'm working for, it is a six-figure job, and it's well into it. So it is comfortable. It allows you know the freedom to have a little bit of money, and it's a a good paying job, really.
Yeah.
Um,
So it has a high
and
ceiling, and in different, you can kind of like in the fractional and the commercial, basically it's there's high ceilings and multiple pass up is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. So once you have put in your hours, like you kind of said, in your time, you keep on making, the pay scale keeps on going up. If you're with the same company, and I guess that's kind of an important thing there as well.
Yeah.
So say if
Please
I
share
were
stuff
to,
like that. That's the advice and stuff like that that would be
yeah,
good to get out
so
of here.
say I leave my company now and go work for, say, one of the big three. I will start down at the bottom of the pay scale and their seniority list. So all pilots are on a seniority list with the company that they work for. So if you stay with the same company, you start working up the same pay scale and working up the seniority list. That's how you become a captain, and that's how you get paid more. So if you change jobs, you'll start down at the bottom and then start working your way up. Um, so um, Kind of forget where I was going with that, but yeah,
No, we were just
that
talking about this the ceiling and the good approaches to, I guess, leverage and how to get that high salary. Like good things
yeah,
to know that,
yeah, I
because in my
guess
job, I'm in electrical engineering, and it's not uncommon for people to change companies and to get big bumps when they do that, you know. But somebody in your job is thinking maybe oh, I'll just go work for one company 5 years, move to another one, and move up, and you may get stuck at somewhere and get stuck in a lifestyle making a lot of money. But if you decide you don't like that particular airline and you want to just go jump to another one, like, there's a lot to think about
yeah,
there.
yeah. Most guys don't do that. If you spent any amount of time at an airline, or yeah, company in general, um, yeah, if you're leaving that place, you're probably going to start down at the bottom and then have to work your way up. Um, for myself, I always kind of set 45 to, as my age, to where I was like, I'm probably going to stick with this company no matter where I'm at that point in my life, because to go back down, um, it just wasn't worth it financially. Um, and yeah, so your seniority, um, on that pilot list for whatever that company is everything. It defines your pay, it defines your schedule, it defines your vacations. And the more seniority you get, the better off the better life you're going to have. The better schedule, the better money, the better vacations. So yeah,
Yeah, that's actually very important for somebody early on, planning out, kind of mapping more than a few years of their life out to commit to something. And if you don't like something in 1 or 2 years, you better move fast because you don't want to stay there
yeah,
too long and
kind
make the
of,
move.
yeah, yep.
So
Yeah, for instance, I with the airlines that I work for, the first one I worked for 5 years. The second one I worked for about 4 years, and decided, yeah, I'm going to make that next jump, and hopefully that'll be my final, career position.
yeah,
So far, it's looking like that's true.
yeah, it's good, good. Do you have any questions about that, James, before we move on?
I think I did have one question. So for me, because I want to go to like currently, I went toured school. They have an aviation program. It's one of the best in the United States. Uh, I mean, there's always a way to find to put the best in there somehow, but uh, I have a couple of friends that are going. One that's in the aviation program, and it's at Laterno, and so they have their aviation degrees, which is the way that you can get into the aviation program. And the one that I'm interested in is the pro flight degree, and basically it'll take you through, your 4 years of school. I think the first year it's just classes, and then the second year on, you start actually flying, and they take you through everything up to the commercial license, including getting CFI certifications, along the way so that you can get those hours. Uh, and I was just interested to hear your thoughts on basically, is there something else that I could throw in there or that I should, consider?
So the, it really depends on where the aviation um, uh, community is at the time. Right now, there's a pilot shortage, and for me personally, what I would recommend, a young guy just getting into it, do it the fastest way possible. Um, and it's difficult because I was always under the assumption that, and at the time that I was getting into aviation, you needed a degree, some type of bachelor degree or something. Um, Today, that's not so much the case. I think most of the big airlines, and I think even the company I work for, we don't even require degrees anymore. It's just a matter of flight time and having your commercial license and your ATP and all that. Um, so I would almost say, hey, it's tough to give that advice because it really depends on the individual. Hey, do you want to go to the 4 year college and get all of your ratings and a degree, or do you just want to go to there's flying schools out there like one's called All ATPs. There's numerous ones out there that you can strictly just go to and get your ratings and go start flying. Um, and there's a lot of those schools, and like I said, I'm kind of out of that realm for the most part anymore. But I know a lot of those schools that are private do have connections with airlines, whether it's a regional feeder or whether it's like a Frontier or a JetBlue or something like that, where they automatically get you an interview at one of those airlines and get you started on that airline career. I know a lot of universities kind of have that same setup as well, but it really depends on what you want to do, and financially as well. If you got, of course, scholarships to a university or something, heck, go that route. Um, because going to one of these private flight schools is pretty expensive as well. So it just depends on where you are in your life, what kind of finances you have as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good question, James. Very specific to you too. So I'm glad you were able to ask that. So that kind of leads me to a question about the degree programs. I definitely don't want to discourage anybody from getting a degree because I always, I have 4 kids myself, and I tell them it just gives you options. It doesn't guarantee you anything. It just gives you maybe a little better option than if you didn't have it. But in this specifically, what does a degree? In this case, there's networking. There's you're getting to work alongside, getting your hours while you're studying. Um, what else does a degree get you anywhere faster? Does it open up doors that maybe wouldn't be open without a degree when it comes to being a pilot? Are there any big drawbacks that you see? I can think in other industries where there's definitely drawbacks, or you get very fixed into certain paths and you can't get into other lanes. But for being a pilot, I don't know if you can speak to that or not. But with the
Right. I'm kind of under the same assumptions. I personally don't see a degree as being bad. Um, and if you have that degree, I am sure, no, that's just one more check mark on that application and resume that you have a degree, and it kind of lifts you up a little higher, if you will. Um, the drawbacks to not having one is
I guess
probably negotiable.
I guess if you wanted
Um,
to leave the industry, like okay, now I don't have a degree. I'm 45 years old. I decided to get out of the industry. But then if your degree was in flying, um,
right.
Like
Um,
maybe picking a versatile degree that plays well among a range of things. You know, thinking of it that way, or I guess looking at job roles if you were to go work for different entities, probably
right,
maybe airline or pilot associated type flying degree, avionics I guess would be a better word. Degree
right.
would probably help in job roles outside of being a pilot specifically, but you wanted to stay in the aviation industry. I could see
So
where that would
yeah,
be
so
helpful.
I know a lot of guys that have gotten that aviation degree in some realm of the aviation industry, and go into either management, which is a popular, step off to the side of a pilot, and then into the management side of an aviation company. For me, like I said earlier, I always thought, well, what if I lose my first class medical? What if my airline collapses and is no longer an airline? What am I going to do? And that's
Yeah.
why I got the communications degree. So it was at least something completely out of the industry that I could fall back on and say, hey, I've got this degree in communications. I can explore other avenues other than an aviation
Yeah.
career.
That's yeah, that was a great topic to talk about. And kind of to wind that topic down about education, James, you've touched on Laterno. Researching this, a friend mentioned Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Brian, do you have any other, I guess, a few names to throw out there if somebody was looking at show notes on this and kind of wondering, like, I'll go Google it and I'm going to get whoever paid to have their ad put up front. But do you have any recommendations for
So
either the
if you're
flight schools or education programs?
yeah, if you're looking for universities, the big ones are Embry Riddle. That's the biggest well known one out there. There's also Purdue University, which has a great flying program. Um, North Dakota University, I believe, also has another great program. Those are about the big three that come out, and then there's some that are kind of like right below that level, and I can't come up with names.
No, that's fine. You named a few already. Just
Yeah,
yeah, I'm looking for just a few
yeah.
references to put
So
in there, so people aren't just
those
struggling.
are the big ones that for university wise. Um, and then as far if you didn't want to follow the university path, oh gosh, there's a number of them. I went to one that's based down in Florida now. That's called Ari Ben Aviator. I believe that's in Fort Pierce. Um, they were great. Um, there's another one called All ATPs. Um, and there's just a number of different types of flight schools like that where they take you from zero time all the way up to an interview with an airline.
Okay, great. And if somebody was James, you have any more questions about that along those lines before we move on? I'm going to
I'm
talk
good.
about job searching next. If somebody was looking for jobs in this industry, what are some terms other than just randomly searching pilot? I mean, is it that generic, or are there specialized
you,
names that are helpful to know? That
you know what? One site that I have always loved. It's called. I'd have to look at it. I believe it's Airline Pilots Central. I could look it up for you here
that's
real
fine.
quick.
Yeah, you can send it
But
later.
yeah, I believe it's Airline Pilots Central, and they give you a breakdown of every single airline out there. Um, how many airplanes they have, how many pilots they have, whether or not they're hiring, and how much you can possibly make at that airline. It is a fantastic resource.
Wow.
And if you're looking into getting into the industry, I would highly recommend just kind of, looking through that website. I believe there's a forum on there as well where, individuals can talk back and forth about what's going on and who's interviewing for what and what the interview process is kind of like.
Okay. And do people normally go to airline? industries to look for jobs? Do you have to know the name of the company, or do they you go on Indeed or Monster.com and type in I want to
That
where
one
all
I
can I be a
couldn't tell
pilot?
you anymore.
No, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, that I'm not sure. I know at the time when I was starting to look, it was a centralized kind of uh, website that you went to, but I couldn't even tell you what it is anymore. So
Yeah,
that
that's
I'm
okay.
not sure.
James, have you gotten into any of that? Like just poked around at like what kind of job openings? I know you're like kind of early and you're not going to be a commercial pilot tomorrow, but have you thought
Yeah,
about jobs or where you would go look, or have you even done that yet?
I have. I've looked at through this certain stuff, like going through regional airlines first, and then going up and joining the bigger mother company, if you want to call it that, the mother airline. Like American Eagle and then American Airlines, right? For example, and I've seen that stuff. I didn't know about what you just talked about. I'll definitely have to look into uh, that resource. But yeah, looking at like different how they hire and what companies do hire more pilots and,
Okay,
of
and
course,
so you're
pay.
you're looking, yeah, no, no. So you're looking more though, not on like a generic like LinkedIn or Monster.com. You're having to know to go look at the other airlines, the regional airline names is where you're looking more for the job
Yeah, I look at,
postings.
not just one or two websites, but 2 dozen websites, 3 dozen websites, get all the different information that I can out of it.
Okay, yeah, and
Yeah,
that's what I
I
was
think
kind of wondering.
the ones that I would recommend it would be the one I said earlier. I believe it's called Airline Pilot Central, um, and then the other one is Flight Level 350, and those are probably two of the best resources out there to just get information about who's doing what in the industry.
Okay, and I'll put those in the show notes too. I'll go look those up, and I kind of do a blog page once we do the interview, and I'll post it. And I'll try to pull some references and short summaries that somebody can do a one page capture. If they don't listen to the whole interview itself word for word. So that's the job search, salaries, the well established programs. Um, we talked a lot already about the different roles. If you could maybe just real quick, you don't have to get into you know too long a description of them, but just the different tiers as you started. I think you mentioned kind of a private, then instrumental, then commercial, and what are your different? Those are your license that you have, and then what are your different titles? First officer, captain, training captain. What's that
So
ladder, career ladder, kind of?
yeah, the career ladder basically when you get hired at an airline, we'll use that term generically there. When you get hired at an airline, you become a first officer there. Um, you're sitting in the right seat, and basically you're assisting the captain in all the duties of flying the aircraft. Making sure number one, safety is always number one. And then, making sure that passengers get from, of course, point A to point B. Um, Once you start moving up the seniority list and you have enough seniority, and that depends on the company, it depends on a lot of different things. But like I mentioned earlier, the seniority list is where your progression is within the company. And once you start moving up that list, you will become a captain. And that's pretty much the pinnacle of the flying career is to be a captain at an airline. Um, for me, I wanted to instruct new guys coming in, so I applied to becoming an instructor pilot, and I've been in that role here for about a year or so now, and um, you do get paid a little more on that. But my thing was is that what I was one of these young guys that came in, and I had a lot of good instructor pilots, and I was hoping to be one of those guys myself and pass along good information, practical information, and just be able to help out and mentor the new guys coming up
Yeah,
in the industry. So
those guys are going to be flying your family one day, so
yeah, that's exactly it.
you
That's
have a
exactly
vested
it.
interest.
Yes.
No, that's great to hear that that's your outlook on it. that is, nice to hear, and I like to see, and I get that a lot on these, like, more senior people put back into it. Um, I like to call it, at some point in my career, I'd like to get paid for what I know, not what I do.
Right. Yep.
So
Exactly.
there's a crossover point you make it, hopefully at some point,
That's
depending on what
exactly
your
it.
industry is. But okay, I've hit on pretty much everything. The last thing I have really is just any advice or inspiring words. And James, I want to give you a chance at the end for any questions too. So maybe I'll ask James if you have any questions, and then we'll wrap up. Brian, with any advice you might have to the next round of pilots, or inspiring words you have that you'd like to share before we drop off. But James, do you have any further questions or anything like that?
No, I think I'm
No,
good.
you good?
Thank you.
All right, great. So, Brian, any parting words you'd like to share with
Any
anybody?
parting words? No, you know what? It's something that you have to have passion for. Um, and if you don't have that passion, you just think, oh, I want to be a pilot because it pays well. I wouldn't recommend it. You definitely have the passion because it is a lot of steps, it's a lot of testing, and it is a lot of hard work. But it's very rewarding once you get there. Um, and yeah, it's a great career. You get to see the world if you want to, and it provides well for bringing up a family and all that kind of stuff as well. Um, if I may, one of those things that I we hadn't talked about, and perks of a job that I was just kind of thinking about myself sitting
Oh,
here.
please do share.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, there's a lot of perks to being a pilot as well. Whether it's with an airline where you get to fly for free, anywhere you want in the world, really. And that's probably the biggest perk that people probably would think of.
Do you get to
Because
bring
piloting
along a
there,
significant other too?
you get to bring along your family.
Oh, your
So
family,
yeah,
even better.
yeah. So the entire family gets to fly for free, and typically with the airlines, your mom and dad also get to fly for free, or at least a very steep discount as well. Um, and with
Do
that,
your parents know that,
you
James?
um, as well, you get what's called buddy passes at the airlines, so you can hand those out to friends. Usually, it's about five a year, somewhere in there, depending on the airline. And those people get to fly at a steeply discounted rate as well. Um, so that's the big thing. For me in the fractional industry, um, we fly on corporate jets that are occupied most of the time by very wealthy individuals, and when it's not occupied, we can fly on the back of our aircraft for free as well. Now it's kind of a surprise where you're going to go because you can't just say, oh, I want to go to this place. It's if there is a airplane going to wherever it's going, you can hop on that airplane and go. um, but it is a pretty nice benefit. We also get hotel points, which allow you to stay at hotels for free.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then we also so when we fly to go find our airplanes wherever they are in the country, we usually fly on the back of the airlines, and we get the airline points. So therefore, we can kind of fly for free on the airlines as well.
Wow.
So those are just some of the perks and benefits. There's a few others here and there, but those are the big ones, really.
If you
So
like to travel and see places, that's huge because that's usually the
it's
biggest. A, you need time off to go, and B, you need money to go. But if you're racking
right,
up hotels, you're getting free airlines, your job is basically going to a destination anyway.
right,
That is your office, is the destination, the way to the
yeah.
destination.
And
Yeah,
I tell people I haven't paid for a hotel room in probably the last 10 years. It's all been on points,
it's amazing.
so it's a huge perk to the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing
So
that too.
yeah, yeah,
That's
absolutely,
anybody's looking to maybe wonder if they should cross over that threshold and make that decision. Maybe that's what they needed to hear.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. So
All right. Well, great. We'll wrap it up with that. I really appreciate both of your time and sharing your insight, and James sharing your curiosity about this. And I hope there were some good takeaways from everybody on it. We'll see where this goes.
Absolutely.